Welcome back to Getting Lost with myself, Gunnar, on the front room, and my good friend.
Dan, who is totally lost about Lost.
So here we are with episode number 9, Solitary. So initial thoughts on this one. I think this is another one where you get another big pile of stuff.
Yeah, this one. I think invariably the description I seem to use to describe Lost episodes is the word interesting, and this is again the word I would use to describe this episode as well. On a few different levels, though. I mean, one of the things that was immediately interesting is almost like within about 5 minutes, it felt like a different style to a lot of the other episodes. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this feels like it's actually been done by a different director. And when I looked it up afterwards, it is actually a director who hadn't done any of the other episodes. And you could kind of sense that from the sort of way it kind of used musical cues, and also it had a bit of a quicker editing thing that was going on, and sort of different uses of like darkness in particular when they're sort of framing people.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting that I picked up on that like way earlier than I think I normally would have, because it was so clearly it was a departure in some way, shape, or form from the previous style that was going on. I thought it was a really good episode, and there's a few things in it that I think are quite interesting sort of choices that they made. But weirdly, I could also say that there was bits of the episode that kind of felt a bit flat, and I think part of it is that you've got these. Yeah, I think we've talked about, well, there's usually like an A plot, a B plot, a C plot, and I think the problem was that I was so interested in what I'll call the A plot, which is the interaction between Saeed and Danielle.
Yeah.
But the other bits, I was kind of like, go away, skip over it. Not particularly interested in it. So like you had the flashbacks, which normally in the previous episodes are kind of like one of the most interesting things. I was like completely uninterested in the flashbacks. And it was a bit of the flashbacks in particular were a little bit weird, because it felt like you already kind of knew what you got from the flashbacks.
Yes.
It's almost like we've sort of done this in the previous episode where we sort of reveal, particularly the previous episode, but also a few episodes back where you sort of already found out, Saeed's mourning about this woman. He used to work in military intelligence in Iraq. It turns out he'd done torture and all the other bits and pieces. And so you don't get any big revelations like you do in other episodes from the flashbacks. It's almost like this is just sort of filling in the slight missing pieces to that bit of the story.
Yeah, there's not a lot of surprise in the flashback this time around. And I think in particular that once you kind of have that interaction fairly early on in the flashbacks, where there's the scene about the woman being Saeed's old schoolyard like friend or infatuation or whatever. From that point, you kind of know where it's going to go from what you already know with him carrying the picture around with him.
Yeah, that's it. And so in that respect, it was almost like the flashbacks just fell a little bit flat. But at the same time, you kind of go, well, they needed to do it, because you've effectively set this scene. You need to tell that bit of the story, and it probably only suffers due to the fact that we've got this really interesting other thing going on that you care about far more. So it's like in normal circumstances, you'd be quite happy with the flashbacks. Okay, that fills in those gaps. We learn a bit more exactly on terms of how Saeed's gone from evil torturer person to sort of coming around and sort of redeeming himself by freeing her at the end type thing. But it was sort of a little bit interesting that's what's going on. And then the sort of C plot, it was fun, but again, it was kind of didn't really do anything, and it was the golfing.
I think much more than the episode so far, like the 3 plot strands here almost are kind of independent of each other. Because I think in previous episodes you've had like the comedy C plot, but it's also been connected into something else that's happening. So like you had the one where Shannon tricks Charlie into getting some fish, but that was actually kind of connected to some of the other character stuff that was going on. Whereas, this time around, the golf is quite fun, but it doesn't really do anything. The only little bit you really get from it is Sawyer making a little bit of an effort to kind of join in.
I mean, I think it's one of those, just because the A plot was so interesting, you kind of dismiss the C plot a little bit, because it is somewhat important in that, first of all, it gives Hurley an actual leadership role and a purpose type thing, which you hadn't seen before. It's like, oh, suddenly he's actually found his element, and part of his element is clearly getting people together and getting people happy type thing. And it's important that it brought back together all the people from the beach and all the people from the caves, because both groups come to see and play the golf game. So I think that it's not silly. It's not like, oh, didn't serve any real purpose. It was just overshadowed somewhat by all the sort of fairly dark stuff that's going on in the A plot versus the fairly happy coming together bits of the C plot. So
I think it is, like, as you say, it's fair to say, like we've said, like the flashbacks and the golf don't really add a lot, but then, as you mentioned, like the main sort of meat of the episode does add in an awful lot of stuff. So we start with Saeed finding a cable on the beach.
You've got this mysterious cable that he finds, and it's like, oh, it looked like a power cable when I was kind of assuming that was a power cable. Although it's slightly weird because he follows the power cable and then it's not powering the cave because there's batteries or stuff. But I don't.
This is one of the things that I think have just crop up like a few times throughout the series, and it's easy to lose track of things because you have him following the cable, but you never actually find out where that cable goes because
he gets knocked out.
Yeah, he gets knocked out. So it's easy to then forget that cable is still a thing.
Still there, it's still a thing. And
because it's easy to think, oh, the cable led him to Danielle, and think, well, the cable's not relevant anymore. But it's like, well, we've still not had an actual answer to what that cable is.
That was it, because it was clearly a power cable, but they actually make a point of, well, you can't be running that radio off those batteries type thing, when she's clearly running, what she's doing. And then she says, oh, the radio's somewhere else type thing, presumably at the other end of the cable is the sort of suggestion. That's a sort of new mystery. It's like, why is there a power cable and where's it going in both directions? Because it's like, well, it's going to the sea. Where's that going to? And where's it actually going on land as well? Then you had the trap, so he gets caught, and that's when we meet Danielle. But
well, I think that's one of the really interesting things about Danielle, particularly at this point, is she is clearly mentally unstable for whatever reason. So a lot of the stuff she talks about, you don't know whether to trust it, or not. In particular, when she starts talking about a disease, and she's killed the rest of her team because of that disease. You're like, well, is the disease real, or did she imagine it?
Because you get so many hints from her as to stuff going on, because she talks about
she name checks a lot of things that are going to be
so what did I wrote down a ton of bits and pieces. So when she first meets when she's first interacting with Saeed, she's sort of she's asking, where is Alex? I know what you are is one of the sort of lines. She's saying that I know what you are, Saeed. They and the others like you was another line that came up there. And what was it that they were the carriers of what's this disease type thing, and it sort of refers to the others. Who are they? And they whisper. Was the other line I sort of jotted down? Of course, at the end of the episode, you hear whispering. When Saeed's in the woods type stuff. So there's a lot of sort of hints as to something supernatural, something going on there. At one point, I was sort of thinking, oh, is this the thing type thing? The thing type thing? That's
the thing.
Because it's like, oh, there's the disease and then they become bad or something. Is that what's going on? And that sort of thing? Because she says she killed her husband because he turned or something. So is it like people... Yeah. Is it all just made up in her head? Thing one. Is it a sort of disease thing, like, they become zombies or something? Or is it a sort of people pretending to be other people?
And it's like, yeah, and there were a couple of like really like small bits in there that I think are easy to miss that also add to it. So like she mentions that she was part of a science team, and it's like, well, why were a science team interested in the islands? I think she name checks the Black Rock.
Yeah, there's a mention of the Black Rock just as in to the extent that you kind of go, oh, there's something important there, but you don't get anything more than that.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that they did well here is they throw a lot of stuff out, but they don't kind of really kind of focus on it. They don't go, oh, she mentioned this. This is important. Yeah. She just there's a lot of stuff that she mentions. Some of it kind of Saeed picks up on, some of it he doesn't pick up on, because I think he does ask, what does she mean by the others? But a lot of the other stuff he doesn't really.
I think he questions where's the Black Rock as well, possibly. I think that was the other one that he sort of asks about. And the other like interesting way it's not even name checking something, but when they hear the noise outside and she grabs the gun and she says, oh, if we're lucky, it's one of the bears type thing.
Yeah.
And it's immediately like, I think Saeed says, oh, yeah, is it a monster type thing? And her response is, there's no such thing as monsters. And you're like, well, if a bear's the lucky option and we don't have monsters, what's this thing that's above the bears? But
well, that implies that she knows more about the mysterious thing in the woods.
And it's clearly bad, but not a monster. So,
and of course, and I think the other big one for me comes towards the end where it's revealed that Alex is her child, and it's like, well, what has happened to her child?
Yeah, and that was one that it didn't seem. It wasn't like a huge surprise just because of the context, because we'd already ascertained that Alex wasn't the husband at that point.
Yeah.
And so in my head, it made sense that it was child because of the way the context was going. But at the same time, you have the realization then that she killed her husband, seemingly deliberate, like in a very deliberate manner, in that removing the firing pin from the rifle is quite a planned out. This isn't a spur of the moment thing. That's quite a cold-blooded way of doing it.
And that implies that it's another. This is a really awkward sentence, isn't it? It's another thing like the thing.
Yeah,
that kind of there's obviously been that level of paranoia between her and the husband. So the husband's obviously been looking to defend himself.
Yes.
Again, brings up that question of, was there a disease, or was that her just having snapped and going crazy?
But as we said before, the reference that swung into my mind is the thing and the whole people not being able to trust each other type thing. And there was just on that last bit, there was some quite nice Saeed bits, I think, that occurred there, because like when he runs out. So step back a second. So outside of the whole mystery thing, which we've got with Danielle, the purpose of the episode is kind of to sort of effectively revert Saeed back to what he was before he had to do the confidence man torturing type bits.
Yeah.
It's sort of getting him back to
bringing back sympathy for Saeed. Yeah.
That seemed to be the sort of one of the things that clearly they had to accomplish in the episode. And I quite liked the way he sort of talks about, he's been hanging on to, I've forgotten the girl's name that he tortured, and
Nadia, I think it's Nadia.
Nadia, that's it, yeah. So he'd been hanging on to the image and the photo of Nadia for all this time, and he sort of admits that's what's been holding me back type thing when he's having the conversation with Danielle. And there's some nice little bits, like when he escapes from his bonds and grabs the rifle. He also grabs like maps and things, but leaves behind the photo of Nadia.
Yeah.
Sort of classic sort of symbolism. Yes, I'm leaving that behind. I'm moving on to, this is my problem now. I'm leaving that. Which is kind of his sort of arc to get back to the group and be part of that community again. And that's kind of nicely juxtaposed between what's going on with Danielle, who clearly can't let go and doesn't want to go.
Yes, because because Saeed sort of tries to get her to come and join everybody else.
But he does try and take the shot.
Yeah.
Which is the one bit that sort of counteracts that a little bit. It's like, maybe if he'd like put the rifle down and sort of walked away, you'd feel a little bit more, but he did try and shoot her. But to be fair, if you're a non-Babylon 5 watcher, you probably thought that was justifiable because she's a crazy person.
Well, from his to be fair, from his point of view, she has kidnapped him, electrocuted him.
Yeah, he clearly never watched Babylon 5, so, it's...
One line I did write down, I can't remember actually where it came in now. There is a line of watch them closely.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's one that comes from Danielle, which I think is an interesting one to bear in mind going forwards.
Yes, I've written it down just after the when they separate. So I think it was possibly like the last thing that she says to him. Watch them closely.
Yeah, and then as you mentioned, what I try to do, and I can never quite hear it, is like when Saeed starts hearing the voices. Like I did that thing where I was like rounding it back, like, can I make out exactly what's being like? Can I make out what they're saying? Like,
yeah, I replayed it. I didn't sort of go into like great efforts to it, but the one thing I was trying to work out in my head was whether or not it was supposed to be Danielle's voice or someone else's, because I was convinced it was a female voice, even though it was all distorted and things. And I was like, is it Danielle or is it someone else? And that was I couldn't really get a conclusion on that in my head because
and we have that thing, don't we, where like near the start you have as Saeed is kind of starting to come around, you have where is Alex
in the
being repeated, and that comes in like different voices until sort of towards the end of the sequence you start to recognize it as Mila Furlan. If you know her again, if you've like come across her before, you start to like hear her voice in that mix, but it's not like immediately obvious that it's just one person saying it.
Just flicking through to see if there was anything else that I'd sort of picked up on. There was a few other like little nice bits of the episode as well, but I mean, basically that episode the focus was clearly that sort of plot line, which was.
Plus, we can chalk up another unnamed background survivor. There was the guy with the rash.
Yes, there was the guy with the rash. Who do we even get his name? The hypochondriac guy who.
I don't think you do, and I think. And this kind of bleeds into a little bit into the conversation for the next episode. But I think the fact that they've thrown in a couple of random background survivors is a deliberate choice.
Yeah, I think that's probably talk about that in the next episode. They throw in a few random extras. Not Steve and other guy, but hypochondriac guy and Ethan guy. That was I think the two they sort of randomly introduced in this one. But I recall that there was one like nice little interaction. I can't remember exactly who it was with, but it was like when there's a point where at the golfing scene where they're talking about like weird stuff and like someone mentions the polar bear.
Oh yeah, and Michael's like polar bear, and somebody's like, you didn't hear about the polar bear?
Yeah, which is sort of this classic thing where people still aren't telling each other what's been going on type thing. So like you still have that idea that only small bits of the group actually have the full picture.
I think it's a nice little moment because obviously it's funny for the audience, but it's also a nice little reminder that not necessarily all of the characters know everything that the audience does. Yeah,
because you've still got the weird thing that I'm pretty sure at this point Locke still doesn't know about the radio message. Because there was that, because they they didn't tell everyone about the radio transmission 2 episodes ago. Whenever Saeed got knocked out, and we've got the sort of implication that it might be Locke. Their sort of cover story was that he was trying to make a transmission, not he was trying to find this French transmission.
Yeah.
So there's bits and pieces like that, like clearly important. Well, they're not plot points, but clearly important information to be aware of as survivors.
And I guess this episode adds in another possibility. It's like it was either Locke, was it Sawyer in some way? Could it possibly at this point now have been Danielle for some reason?
Yeah, that was one thing that crossed my mind, was that you've created now another possibility. Although I still maintain that I cannot perceive the way Locke treated that conversation, though however many episodes that were ago, if it wasn't him who did it. That's the But maybe it certainly as soon as you've got there's someone else alive and someone who's clearly experienced in bushcraft and survival because she's built all those traps and all the other bits and pieces. She's quite definitely a plausible suspect to have snuck up behind Saeed and bashed him on the head. And if it was her, it might even sort of explain away a little bit of like how hostile she is towards him then, because it's like, this isn't even the first time she's actually encountered him.
And that's it, yeah. I think we'll see the side taking the maps. We'll wait for him to cross-reference with the information he did get from his triangulations.
Yep. Michael yet again being a piss poor father.
Oh yeah, I think that was quite. I quite like that little. That's an interesting relationship. I think that's developing between Michael and Walt at this point, because at the episode, I think it's just previous with the cave in, where you see Walt being quite like, "Oh, my dad's taking charge. Like, my dad's worried." But then, obviously, now you get the Michael's managed to leave Walt behind without realizing that like nobody's looking after him.
Yeah, and you have the sort of there's a few little interactions where Walt wants to go with Locke to learn to hunt type thing, and that's where you meet Ethan, I think, at the first time as well. And Michael is vehemently opposed to Walt seemingly interacting with Locke. So and the fact that he then gets distracted playing golf, and Walt wanders off alone to go and find Locke.
Yeah. But that's the other moment. It's like, it seems like quite a genuine like apology from Michael. And then somebody's like, "It's your shot," and he's just like immediately like, "I forget I have a kid," right? Yeah,
it's your shot, Michael. By the way, you've just literally had this conversation about how you're going to let Walt go ahead of everyone else. It's like, now it's your shot. No.
Yeah, you haven't gone, "Walt, would you like to take my shot?" You've just gone like, yeah. So that was episode 9.